I'm Alexandra Kreis, and you're listening to Outer Travel in a Journey. Journeying now for 30 years into the life and practice of yoga, I have met many who have taken interesting turns, went past extraordinary bumps, and reached unexpected places. People with whom I shared conversations about everyday struggles, intimate realizations, larger questions, ideas, and dreams. So today, I'm passing on the mic to one of them so we could hear and celebrate the wisdom in people's differences and experiences. Welcome to Outer Travel in a Journey. On my show today, I have Shawn Flot. I practiced this a long time, dear listener, because I would call him Shawn Flot. We're laughing already here. So hello and welcome, Shawn.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
And I'm so glad you made the time. You tried so much to kind of direct other souls already into the show, and I'm so glad you kind of dared your step forward. For those who don't know Shawn lives in the US in Southern Oregon, and he is a practitioner of mobility and movement. So he runs a clinical practice which is called Moving into Harmony, and you do a lot of physical work, hands-on work that heals connective tissue. We're going to come down to what that means to you personally in a second. And further out, as we're all trapped in this COVID for longer than thought, of course, you've kind of leaned out into the greater public with the nicest idea ever, because where else can we go than just out into the wilderness? And so you're also forming a second branch of what you do called A Well-Explored Life. And it's about hiking and more.
I'm actually including a little Ayurveda in it.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
Yeah. I mean, hikers are known not to eat well, during a 20-day adventure. So I'm
Really?
trying to look, you can do these things.
You got me right there. What can we do? Let's get started.
Right.
Well, maybe you want to introduce yourself a little bit. How did you come to be a hands-on kind of therapist, as you call yourself, working with trauma? Here we go again, listeners. I think it's a good subject for us to listen to over and over again from all points of view. So, Shawn, will you kind of tell us your story, please?
Yeah. I mean, I think actually it started as a teenager in sports and not really performing well. And so I was going to a physical therapist to help with my shin splints and got very intrigued about moving into that realm of service. But really the shift from sort of what I was taught in graduate school didn't seem to feel right. And I started exploring other things, but I was dabbling. I was a young PT, but I was also a semi-professional triathlete. So I was actually getting paid to race.
Oh, wow.
And I was training for an Ironman, and you had to qualify to get there. So I was going to go up to Canada and qualify. And about 2.5, 3 months before that, I hit a dog on a training ride going about 20 miles an hour, straight on, just bang. And it landed straight on my head. That was the first thing that hit the ground.
Wow.
And, knowing what I knew, I did a little bit of help. I got some craniosacral. I competed, but I didn't do well. I didn't end up qualifying, but I started to notice my body. It started physiologically. Like in the race, I actually couldn't finish on a high note because I was like not processing the sugars and the salts and everything, and I was getting into that delirium state, and that was a first for me. And so that was the first time. I was thinking about this, like it wasn't a physical thing, it was the physiological I couldn't match my physiology to the physical performance that I was trying to do. But I didn't know, right? You just don't know what's happening. You do the best you can. And I continued to cascade. I developed foot pain, migraines. I had a severe back injury that took me out of work. I was working at a hospital at the time, and no one could really help. It was a very significant, quick, like it happened, like the dominoes just went.
Wow. In what time span are we talking? I mean, how old were you? What time span are we talking?
That was 1996, so I'm 52. So that was, like
25 years ago. Yeah. Okay. So mid 20s.
And so that, you know, like it took me out of work. It took me out of being physically proud. My relationship went to pot. You know, everything just sort of started, you know, and I was in that first 26, 27 years, right? It first sort of like,
wow.
But I just wasn't getting the help that I needed, and it kept getting worse. And so I'd heard a name, you know how we hear these whispers, of this gentleman, Frank Lowen. And he was in the organization that I was beginning to dabble in, the outside the realm of PT.
Yeah.
And they were doing these intensives in Albuquerque, like 40 tables, people significantly not well, significant disease processes, and you showed up and you got intense body work done. And the woman was trying to help me. She was one of the students, the advanced students. And this gentleman with this gold pompadour hair, he was about, you know, he's like 5'6", kind of comes up and he's like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "I can't seem to do what, you know, I'm supposed to be doing, or what I feel I should be doing." He's like, "Huh." So he had me stand up. I could barely bend to touch my hands to my knees. I had so much pain. And he said, "Okay." He gets me back down on the table, and he literally put his hand on my sacrum. I was on my belly, and the force was like maybe like this. It was not hard. It wasn't a manipulation.
Yeah.
It was very soft, and I could feel my whole system just open up. And he had me stand back up, and I went right to the floor.
Wow.
In one subtle little movement.
And what kind of technique was that? Do you know from then?
Yeah, I mean, later. So, you know, I said, "Was that Frank?" And she's like, "Yeah, you got lucky." I'm like, "Yeah, I got lucky."
Definitely got lucky.
And that's, you know, that drove me to study with him. But what I later found out, it took me a few years to, you know, really kind of come up with the, you know, the bravery to ask him, what happens when force comes through our bodies is it physiologically can change things on axis. So it's not you won't see it on an image, like you just won't see something off, but physiologically, the way the blood and the fluids take in that force, you know, like force moves through water, and if something's there, it's going to either go around it or break through it. And he said you had a descended sacrum. And so what that meant was the force that came through my head came down through my sacrum, which is where I held all my tension, so that wasn't fluid through there, and it lodged a physiological off axis. So I basically had a tethered cord.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, it's like it's tethered because it went down here and stuck. It didn't return.
Yes.
And so that's what alleviated that. And so I began, I mean, it's interesting because it just opened up my vision to how forces come into the body. And I think I see a lot of people clinically who that attraction, oh yeah, you've had a whiplash, you know, the hit from behind. Well, if you hit something in front, there's a force, but then it's the seatbelt that throws you back.
Yeah.
That's also a ascended, descended phenomenon. And these things aren't picked up on imagery. What it ends up being is someone comes in with severe pain many months later because the body just can't adapt anymore.
And do we all carry this? I mean, I'm immediately being thrown back. I had an incident as a 14-year-old. You know, I got thrown very far across the street. You know, I was on a bike. I got hit by a car, and I ended up on the other side of the road, which is, you know, to me must have been quite a push by the car. I don't remember a thing of that, not like you, rolling actively. I was just, waking up back in the hospital. But I then wonder, do I carry these things in me and don't know about them, or do they not always show like that? Or does the body kind of know how to remedy itself? What's, because you've been studying this now for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, the way Frank always coached us was that symptoms, pain, symptoms, disease don't show up until the body can't adapt anymore.
mm,
So my guess is with all the other things that you do for your well-being, because the facets of our well-being aren't just physical or just diet, there's so many other realms that help to support us that I think you're doing well. But who knows if it's under the surface, that if you had another significant impact, or you had another traumatic event in your life, or you go through a severe grieving process, if that
mm,
inability to adapt to that physiological offset
mm,
or physical, right,
mm,
um, can't be adapted to anymore. So
mm.
and that's really what the idea with hands-on work for me is. I'm just giving back the person and their body options,
Wow.
and then it's up to them through movement. I love the yoga
Mm.
to implement and integrate those new options.
I see what you mean, but what I haven't heard you say is what's the technique called,
Oh, I'm sorry. So I'm sorry. So it started out as dynamic manual interface, and
Yes.
he's gone through different iterations of trying to name it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
basically Lowen Systems now.
Low-end systems.
Lowen, Lowen
Ah.
Systems.
Mm.
And I understand that he's focusing, he's up there. He's the same age as Shandor.
Ah.
So he's 79, 80. And he's been focusing on a school in Europe for the osteopaths. He feels that the osteopaths, which is some of his story,
Yes.
Jean-Pierre Barral was his main
Oh.
instructor, who's the French osteopath for the visceral manipulation. So you can see where this kind of starts to tie in.
Yeah, amazing, right?
Yeah, so there may be some osteopaths that are studying with him in Europe.
Wow.
So I
And
can find out.
and this Lowen technique does he only teach that to people who are already in the healing field through manual therapy, or
Pretty much. Yeah,
Hmm.
he always had that sort of filter that you got to have a license to touch because of what we're actually working with physiologically. You have to have an understanding of body physiology. He always challenged me to when I put my hand on the body, what am I in contact with? And so that three-dimensional engagement of knowing what I'm on was challenging, but it was also easy for me because I was very left-brained for a long time.
Yeah.
But then the right brain kicked in.
And the
So
brain,
yeah, it's
thank
more
God.
Lowen Systems is the more recent name that people might find, or to ask any osteopaths in Europe that have studied with Frank Lowen.
Or in the US, because I do have
Or in the
listeners.
US, it's small group. It's a small group. It's just breaks my
wow.
heart that this
Wow.
didn't really take off.
Hmm.
But it does require very relaxed focus, less doing, more listening. It's kind of the old osteopathic way in Europe, where you had an hour to assess somebody and you were given one manipulation for your test. So
it's amazing, right? I mean, we're coming back to this time thing. We talked about it a little bit. I know that some people are always curious what I talk about with my guests before the show, but we talked about, of course, the pandemic and being stuck. But also, to me, another sign of the pandemic is the slowing down, that sense of overwhelm that we have through busy lives. A sentence that I learned in English in Ireland was, give a busy woman a job, because You know, it's like that. It gets done. It simply gets done, and it gets done because you're rolling, you're rolling, you're rolling, and little do we know how hard we've been rolling throughout the last century, you know, and how fast we've gone. And what you're talking about is the return of the slow, and everybody's in need of that. All these movements of slow, you know, food and slow. I hear it more and more, and now you're
Yeah.
coming with your version of it. What do you love about the work the most? Thinking about it now.
You know, that I actually get to practice presence and actually be with somebody. I'm not on an agenda. You know, I have a plan to be the best at what I can do, but where that takes me with a person in their predicament, it really comes out of my ability to listen both here, here, and here.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that's an intimate setting when you're in person. And in terms of just that someone feels like they're being contacted, they're being heard,
Yeah.
and the body knows it. The body knows it more than the mind.
And do we need the physical hands on there, Shawn? Or can we live without it? If it's really a matter of being with somebody who highly sensitively listens to you, is it necessary to have that shift through? Because it's not a real manipulation what he does, right? If you say it sounded almost like Reiki to me when you're saying like he wasn't
No, no, it's not
forcing,
Reiki.
not
It's
Reiki.
it is more physiological.
Uh-huh.
So the rhythm is felt, like people do feel the shifts. Reiki is a different ether of engagement. No, this is that people do notice, and it is the movements are asymmetrical.
Mm-hmm.
So it relates to our functional movement. And that's what I love about this, where craniosacral is what we call a symmetrical. Both sides move the same. In Frank's work, it's very much asymmetrical, just like we walk, just like we carry our normal activity. And so I can match what someone does in their lives and feel these physiological or, you know, overuse, like they're always right-handed doing their work. That plays out in the lower leg. And so it's very real, it's very tangible, and very effective, because I'm engaging with a circulatory rhythm that the body wants to find some balance. And that's why I named my business Moving into Harmony, was because I'm looking for that set of balance. Not that you're balanced, you know, but the body is balanced in a way that you can function. And so back to your question, you know, for years I just relied on my hands, and people I didn't feel were integrating. They would come back with very similar patterns, with me actually guiding them in a movement way, or getting them to think about movement differently in normal life, just sitting up and down out of a chair, right? But how someone squats can really change a lot of things. And it's just squatting the chair. You tell them squat and they're like, you know, like, but you say, well, you squat down in the chair, let's just do that, right? So I really feel that movement is a key, and I think a lot of people can get a lot of benefit out of guided movement. And then when there's something stuck that there's something that can't get through, then the hands-on guidance to shift something is nice.
I love it. Yeah, it's one of these things that I also feel is coming up in our times. We've been so self-made. I mean, at least around in Germany, we're known for being, you know, like self-made humans. And what I always, you know, had a not so much a great love for is that they're so DIY here. And I loved, you know, like I love the service attitude in Ireland and in the US, you know. And to me, it's not an attitude of service, but it shows just one main thing that we keep forgetting as we get more individual, that we kind of belong to each other, that we're dependent on each other. And that's what I hear you saying, you know, it's no harm in if you can't do your movement correctly, if you need assistance in shifting whatever has lodged itself in your body, right?
Yeah. And that, you know, to me, Alex, it comes in so many realms. Like I get people that usually I see because they haven't gotten what they wanted out of other physical therapists or other chiropractors. And I just have to say to them that anybody that is helping you to facilitate some change is creating a space, is creating some options. And it's up to you then to understand how to go back into your regular life, and how can you work with those new options, and where can you become aware of when you start to bind. And so I really feel that that's been a relatively new part of my evolution as a practitioner, to coach everyday life rather than an exercise program.
Yeah. And this is why you came up with this new, I mean, one way was because of the pandemic, but was that something that was on the horizon anyway, your new branch, A Well Explored Life, or what's the idea?
Yeah, I love adventure. I mean, as a kid, as I started to kind of look at this, my mom and dad took us up out of Phoenix to the mountains of the Mogollon, 2-hour drive, and we were in nature almost every weekend.
Wow. Nice.
I know. I was just like, to have that gift was amazing. And so that just drove me more and more to be out and explore nature. And
Yeah.
PT school, it was a 3-year program, so we weren't force fed. And I had a good friend, and her and I we were in Flagstaff, so we'd go up into the reservation, we'd go to Lake Powell, we'd go to the Canyonlands.
Yeah.
Like it was part of just being in school. And so I think that we want to be so much in touch with nature, and back to the concept of nature and life. It's like I just felt like I could speak to these people, I can relate to them.
Yeah.
And then just to bring in these concepts of, do you want to enjoy being on the trail, or are you just trying to survive? And that was the basis for that, was really how can someone really thrive and enjoy this time that is given to them, right? I've been communicating with a lot of the John Muir Trail people. It's a 20-day, 21-day, 250-mile journey through the high Sierras.
Yeah.
And you have to get a permit from a lottery that is very difficult. And so that, even that is a gift.
Yeah.
And so how do you want to be with that gift? Because everyone's focused on the lightest gear and only want to have 25 pounds in their pack. I'm like, well, who's carrying the pack? So that's kind of that was the basis for that, is to try and capture those that are interested in actually, being with their bodies.
Yeah. Is that something that you notice as well? Like being with your body is not the most favorable thing in our lifetime, from the generation we both seem to come.
Yeah. It's I think there's been so much culturalized and familiarized emphasis on intellect.
Yeah. You said that earlier, you're left brainy, and I think I was almost trained into, using my brain more, like these circumstances where you get, something in school, like, nobody likes you because you don't think, you don't think hard enough. You're like, what?
Right.
Like, I'm super sensitive.
And just the pressure.
Yeah, it's a pressure, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, Frank would say, like, you got to learn to feel, Shawn. And then Shandor repeated that, later. And it just kept repeating itself, that you need to learn to feel. And that's so hard.
What was your key point where you think like you made a shift into feeling more?
It was really being introduced to the shadow yoga. I mean, when, through Scott Blossom and Matt Basindian, and then when I met Shandor, and the whispers were there the whole time, but it wasn't. Shandor just finally said, you need to let go of what you know about the body if you want to move into this physiological, bioenergetic realm of how the body actually is interconnected. And that was hard. That was
Mm.
really, really hard to like
Mm.
take all that knowledge and just go
Yes.
and go, okay, okay.
Yeah.
And now it's the breath with Patrick McCowan is like, that's even another layer of, I mean, I'll admit, I've been a control of my breath up until this last year.
Wow. What
I
does
know.
that mean exactly? Let's hear it.
I, in working with Patrick and understanding kind of
Who's Patrick? Can you
respiratory,
introduce it to the listeners?
Patrick McCowan is the founder of Oxygen Advantage. His new
Mm-hmm.
book's coming out in July in the Americas. I don't know what about here. He's Irish.
Mm-hmm.
He's a phenomenal gentleman, but it's all about the oxygen and how it's delivered off of the blood cell into the tissues.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole phenomenon itself. It's not Wim Hof. It's very different. And so there's a breathing. It's actually from Dr. Buteyko and sort of that wisdom from Ukraine about breath holding. And so that's where the basis of Patrick's work came from. But it'll be evolving. It's fascinating. And so the whole idea of the breath hold, especially at the end of an exhale, what is that dynamic? And then breathing really light and slow and low, which are the three kind of rhythms that he speaks of.
Yeah.
I will say I've been a constrictor, thinking that I really wanted, I don't know, drive the breath down. But when I go to that light where I don't even perceive the breath in my hand,
Yes.
it has just
Open up your world.
opened up the world. So I bow, I bow, I bow.
And what does it feel like? What does it feel like to you? Because we talked about feeling. What is it like to shift that perspective? I think many of us don't know what it is not to know the breath. You think like, okay, the breath is there, and some of us wouldn't notice if it wasn't maybe for allergies or other things. So maybe you can go there a little from your perspective and experience.
When I first started to work with Patrick, it's in that silent, both the quietude of the breath, and I think that's where I really realized the control piece was I had moved away from the natural rhythm of breathing. And I think that's what you're asking, or what I'm feeling, is that we don't really get in touch with that natural rhythm. We don't spend a moment, and he says even like 5 minutes every hour to just pause what you're doing and sit back and feel. And there's certain guidance principles around feeling, but the one is like a 3-minute test of, you have a little piece of paper, and can you feel your inhale come in without pulling, so you're just barely feeling and barely moving out, and then you feel your low ribs expand and contract, and can you keep your focus on that for 3 minutes? And he really argues against, if we can't even have that relaxed of a focus on our natural breath, how can we do all these other things? And so he's working in realms with children, concentration and sleep and quality of things. And so, it's what I've realized, I'm actually sharper, I'm more relaxed, I'm more relatable. I can feel when my breath starts to get short, when I'm up against something that is demanding, that I'm, can I meet it a different way? So it was a big shock for me,
not
a
to be
big
doing
shock.
it, even though you do all this breath work in the yoga, right?
I know, right?
Yeah. It's such a big unlearning, like there's so much damage done right now between the Ujjayi and the Uddyanas and the way they are being taught, like totally, as you say, in control and restricted and constricted, opposed to what breath is like. I mean, I had to remedy that quite path because my first yoga style wasn't so much focused on breathing. The teacher I studied with, and he would do pranayama, what he called pranayama, so there was only always just one day in the week when we did it. And then when I kind of learned about the Ujjayi and the Uddiyana, and nobody taught it to me, I kind of made, of course, an ass of myself and taught it myself. And and then there was the I can't breathe anymore, in a practice, in a flowing practice. Why can I not breathe? And
yeah,
I came across then very quickly across Buteyko, including
okay.
Yeah. I've done a whole, like I did workshops on that. I'm not giving, but I took them. And also some other fabulous breathing work I noticed, and books that helped me just to let go of that very, as you say, like determined mindset in yoga, like achieve it, apply discipline. And in some ways you talk about hiking in that way, like the way you just, you just have to make your body do this, and even when you were talking about your triathlon, Ironman stuff, I was thinking like, I would have kind of hold myself up and think like, I got to do this. Like, yes, like the Duracell bunny, like you gotta, and until you can't anymore. And this is why trauma to me is so fabulous. It's not shame. It's actually pushing us into the areas where we're being ignorant and too much in control.
Yeah. And the breath is so intimately close to that wounding in the traumatic events. I mean, it's, it to me, breath is divine. It's always available to us, just like health is always available to us. And where do we begin to sort of like shave the potential or open the door to those things? And so I have found bits of a trauma, childhood trauma, more around abandonment coming up as I've been working with the breath.
Yeah. And do you find it, it's healing then for you? Do you find that these sets of traumas, make sense?
Well, you have to use them that way. I mean, it's all energy that's held or you're not accessing. And so it's just a bound up knot or a block or a dense thing that you've closed off around because it was so painful. And so, and this is Jennifer Wellwood's work. She's my sort of meditation Raja that has given me this perspective of we're open when we're born. And then eventually whatever ends up starting to happen to us, that our aperture closes and closes. And so we're just reopening that aperture to what's available. Right. And that to me is what spirituality, healing is about, is just reopening that aperture, however it's done without force.
Yeah, and that's just life, what the tantrics found. It's just like this expansion, contraction. This is how life works, and maybe we managed to expand from back into where we came from, but then, maybe not. And then we just kind of keep looking at it. There's no wrong, no right in it. Yeah.
I love what you said about that expansion, contraction. That brought back the fascial group. There's a woman, Joanne Ashton, that's all about this. This is what happens as we grow, in the embryo. There's like constant contraction, expansion, and then the heart forms. And it's just, you're right. It all comes back to that folding in, unfolding, folding in, unfolding. It's just like, wow. Happy to be here. Very lucky.
And that's then the right brain to me. That's the right brain. The left brain is on a trajectory. It's like Shiva, and then she comes in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Happy full moon, by the way.
Happy full moon, special pink moon, super moon today. as we're recording. But Shawn, as we're coming to a slow end, to a beautiful one, I hope, is there something that you want to tell our listeners, maybe a word of advice, or maybe something you invite them to? Just be free to maybe use this moment.
Yeah.
Close with everybody who's listening.
I think it comes back to just being with where you're at. Because you can't, we want to be somewhere else. We want to be better. We want to be healthier. There's all these strivings, and we lose track of what's presenting itself right here, right now. I know that's that term's used so much, but really it's a practice of, okay, what's really available to me right now that I can use to get to where I want to go. Whether it's hiking on a trail, or if it's, making dinner, or going on a cleanse, or whatever. Like what are my resources? Because if those resources aren't there, they're going to come from somewhere else, and that costs. And so that's what you talk about slowing down, and, not striving to get rid of the trauma, but be with it. This body has so much amazing love for you and potential, and the more we can be with it, the more the companionship will support us.
Beautiful words to this particular full moon, where we have to let go of things.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on this show and making extra time, and very insightful. Thank you, Shawn, and thank you, listener, for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If you enjoy listening to my podcast, please consider to become a patron at patreon.com/Alexandra Kreis and pledge your donation.